Okay, so welcome to this this second annual meeting of the Centre for the Study of Divine Intelligence. What we're trying to do with these seminars and this symposium is discuss, I suppose, the ultimate secret, actually, of this entire cosmos. It's a very ambitious project here. What we're trying to look at is move this rather sterile and stuck debate between creationists and evolutionists who've got stuck in this whole argument about how the universe got to be here. Why is it so complicated? Why does it evolve in the ways that it does? Why does matter perform according to ordered processes and so on? There's a whole school of thought that says that points towards a divine source or cause. There's another school of thought that says no, it can be explained through physical and chemical processes. That school of thought goes back to the Big Bang and argues that the whole thing is a mechanical process which can be explained according to scientific laws, and then Darwinian evolution kicks in at a certain stage of complexity, and our intelligence as humans and other animals, life forms, is a product of the evolution of that complexity, which is a chemical and physical and biological process. Okay, now there's a debate going on, therefore, between, let's say, people that still want to preserve some kind of divine cause in that whole process, and those that say no, that can be totally ruled out, no need for invoking that divine cause, everything can be explained on purely material and biological and chemical and even mathematical processes. Quantum theory talks about very complex maths to explain the universe. So what we're trying to do in the work of the centre here is slightly different. It's coming at this from a different angle, because that debate has got into total loggerheads. The two schools simply hardly even speak the same language, right? What I'm trying to do as a specialist in comparative philosophy and global philosophy, let's actually look at some of the evidence. Let's actually sort of pause the argument and look at the actual evidence, right? Now, the evidence for scientific theories is well advanced. Lots of people have worked, on scientific research. The evidence on the relationship of divine evidence and the phenomena we witness is much thinner on the ground. People that talk about religion kind of talk as if you've got to have faith and then it will mean something, and they're not comfortable with scientific method. What I'm saying, which is quite revolutionary, is saying let's look at the religious claims, let's look at the theist arguments, let's look at the divine arguments, but then let's apply scientific and empirical scientific protocols to the claims, the truth claims of religions, right? So this is really completing Bacon's work in the advancement of learning, when he left out metaphysics and religion from the advancement of learning, which was written in 1624, which kick-started the philosophy of science. He said, for now, I'm not going to talk about scientific approaches to spirituality because it's too dangerous politically. He was living at a time when Protestants and Catholics were at each other's throats. When one was in power, the other lot were imprisoned and tortured, He was a moderate Anglican who found all that nonsense abhorrent, and so, but he knew it was too dangerous. Man wasn't ready to look at religion scientifically. Now, 400 years later, I'm saying, well, look, guys, it's time to actually have this conversation like mature people. And so let's look at the evidence behind some of the religious truth claims, and then let's test these things. Let's look at them rationally. And so let's look at the whole argument for divine intelligence. If there is a God behind the universe, if there's a God that speaks through the prophetic seers of humanity, if there's a God that's revealed in the sacred texts of mankind, whatever name we use, then how can we begin to talk about that rationally and coherently? So that's the kind of the big question we're looking at. So it's marrying scientific methodology and religious phenomenology, shall we say, which has huge implications for education, for healing, for politics, for sociology, for social work, for personal relationships, for obviously religious customs, practices, debates like should women be bishops, There's huge implications of what we're doing here. And so it's a pleasure to welcome you here to the Castle of the Muses in Scotland for this discussion. It's a good place. One of the papers I'm going to share later is about the local Duke of Argyll in the Victorian era, who actually was very interested in these debates. And he has a personal link with this castle, which I'll be explaining a bit later. I'm going to be doing a historical overview of some of the debates in the Victorian times, because this is an old, question people have grappled with. I'm going to do this opening paper on the study of divine intelligence. It's a kind of overview of how I see where we're at with this. We've been here for a year now. We've had lots of meetings and seminars here at the castle. We've had correspondence with people. The world itself is moving on into some difficult times. We've had last year, political changes in Egypt. We've had the Arab Spring. We've had an awakening process, I think, as people have been claiming their own power and their own rights. And we've had Palestine getting some sort of semi-formal recognition through the UN, hopefully leading to more peace talks and hopefully a true lasting peace settlement in the Middle East. That's what I'm pledged to as director of the Institute of Peace Studies. And our Golden Gate project has also advanced. I think there's a growing awareness among people that spirituality and politics are not disassociated. The elections in America again. People are being forced to nail their colours to the mast, to say what they believe in, and then stand for it. So I think human intelligence is under judgment at this time on the planet. We had a seminar here at the castle about nuclear weapons and the future of nuclear weapons. There are many people trying to get them abolished as illegal. We have the political intelligence to do that. Vested interests, arms manufacturers, political status quo, political parties, all the whole. So how can we get over that? Well, we have to actually use our human intelligence. But can we not also draw on divine intelligence? I'm interested in divine intelligence as something that people can actually work with that benefits them. And so philosophically, there's a peace angle to this, right? So all I'm going to do is look at some of the hypotheses and avenues for academic research that have come up in this last year, like a report from the front line and some of the areas that colleagues and friends are involved in. First area I want to talk about is memory. Memory is a very important thing because memory is very closely related to intelligence. There was a very interesting issue of Scientific American just last month devoted to gifted and talented research. What is it that makes a genius? Geniuses often have highly functioning memories. Why don't we all? How does memory work? What is it? That's something that I want researchers to look into. People are beginning to realise that intelligence is not simply the product of the brain's neurochemical transmissions, although that obviously plays a vital role. The brain is some kind of receiving mechanism for possibly, this is the hypothesis, some extracorporeal knowingness, a soul, should we call it. Let's talk about the soul hypothesis. And is it the soul that carries memory? The evidence of out-of-body experience and near-death experience is that consciousness, soul and memory can become detached from the physical body, and that it does survive the physical body's death. There have been a few cases of very interesting near-death experiences written up in this last year. One by a highly qualified medical surgeon in America who was a skeptic and a rationalist and a non-believer who had an undeniable experience. My friend Peter Fenwick, Professor of Neuropsychiatry at the University of London, has documented hundreds of these cases, thousands. So there's an avenue of research. What is memory? How does it function? And then we have to talk about what is cosmic memory. Jung talked about the collective unconscious. Is it that, can you share memories with each other? When you build a relationship with somebody, you share memories. the more you share, the deeper you become. When you clash about memories, you fall out. When rival tribes remember different events, like the Battle of the Boyne is remembered by the Catholic Irish and the Protestant Irish totally differently, so they're at war with each other over memories. If we're going to have peace on this planet, we have to reconcile our memories. Okay, so that question has a big relationship with peace research. And then divine intelligence, prophets seem to be able to plug into big long-term memory banks in some way. And in some weird way, they can even remember the future. If God is omniscient, God already knows the whole story, how it pans out. How on earth does that work? Is it that time is so speeded up because thought moves at such a fast pace that it circumvents the normal laws of time and space? And if so, could we all do that, please, and remember very quickly the future when we all make peace? We need to get there rapidly, because we're living through a nightmare where we're remembering all the pain and the hurt. We have to get to a place where we remember the good stories. Okay, that leads to my next point, which is about the goddess hypothesis. Divine intelligence is gender-free, but a lot of humanity for a lot of time has thought that God is also the goddess, that the feminine nature of the divine is very, very important for mankind collectively. And we seem to have been suffering a collective amnesia for the last couple of thousand years, when the goddess has been forced out of the story. And I think as a philosopher, my spiritual line managers, ancient philosophers, you know, they invoked the goddess before they did their work. I mean, Plato and Aristotle and, you know, Epicurus and Lucretius, even the great materialist Roman philosopher, talked about the goddess nature, natura. Now, it's interesting that memory is a goddess in the ancient Greek system called Mnemosyne, right? So, and also that divine intelligence was always seen as a goddess. So Athena is the divine intelligence agent of the gods. She is the goddess of wisdom. Athena, right? Minerva is the divine intelligence agent for the Latin and Etruscan civilization. She's the goddess of wisdom, divine intelligence. In the Semitic traditions, the Jewish Christian traditions, the goddess is the Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, which Solomon praises in his writings as the divine spirit that fills all of creation, the Shekinah, the Holy Spirit. And this is what Christ speaks from. People said Christ was imbued with the Holy Spirit. That's where the whole idea of the Logos came from. He was a wisdom teacher, meant he was imbued with the Holy Spirit. And that's why it's in the Trinity. So that's again a feminine aspect of the Godhead. And so really maybe we can pack up and go home. We've solved the problem of divine intelligence. It's the goddess. Okay, hypothesis. Well, that's why Mnemosyne, the mother of the muses, gave birth to the 9 muses. They're also the feminine archetypes of divine wisdom in action. So each muse, we're sitting in the room of Clio here at the Castle of the Muses. There's Calliope, Erato, Urania and so on. They all have different functions. That's divine intelligence stepped down into human cognition possibilities. And that's why Plato, in the Academy, dedicated the Academy to the worship of the 9 muses. He was invoking divine intelligence in that feminine archetypal form. Well, I think that's a jolly good thing. I think we should do that. We should bring that back. We might be cleverer as a people on this planet. In India, bless them, they haven't lost this connection with the goddess of wisdom, because Sarasvati, who's the wife of Brahma, Brahma's the creator, Sarasvati's the creator's consort. They created this entire universe together. And in every university, Chancellor's office or whatever, in India, there's a statue of Sarasvati, because she's the goddess of academics and philosophers and learned people and scholars, Brahmins. Well, you know, so let's welcome back into our lives and into our institutions, our social educational centres and so on, this notion of the goddess hypothesis of divine intelligence. Okay, right, so that's that. Now I want to move on to talk about human intelligence, because it's fine to say, well, divine intelligence is the goddess of wisdom, the Holy Spirit, but what good does that do to us in our complex and broken lives with poverty and war and fear. Don't see much evidence of the goddess in action. We look to politics and it's all just bickering and fighting and legalism and conflicts. So the question then that we have to ask, the fourth big issue for research, is how can human intelligence tune in to receive divine intelligence, right? If there is this sort of goddess energy, Holy Spirit force, whatever we want to call it, how can we tune in and receive it? It can be called buddhi. In the Eastern tradition of Buddhism, Buddha was someone who tuned into this force, I would say. He didn't claim to be anything special, he was just another guy on the street like any of us. But to tune in to buddhi. And that's something we can all practice. The yogi tunes his Atman, his inner selfhood, or her selfhood, so finely that he discovers, lo and behold, Brahman sitting right inside my innermost self. Yeah, the divine intelligence is in my own little human intelligence. That's the process of yoga. The Druid tunes into Arwen, the divine force, the force of the Ceridwen, the goddess of nature, who brings that divine grace into the Druid, which gives poetry and vision. And the Hebrew prophets tuned into Yahweh and the Elohim to find that vibrational current that then inspires them. And the same in the Islamic tradition. Prophetic intelligence works, it didn't stop, it never stops. It works through Muhammad, and in Islamic philosophy they know that it works through the Sufis, it works through great Islamic philosophers, it continues to this day. We have a duty to tune our intelligence as much as possible to reach Allah, to reach wisdom. So this is also something in the Greek tradition. The Sibyls and the oracles of the ancient world did. So if you went to Delphi, you met a priestess who was tuning into that divine intelligence, and she would give a kind of prophetic utterance. Or Dodona, or the other great oracular centres. Often they are associated with healing places dedicated to Asclepius, who was the god of healing and the son of Apollo. I think bringing back Apollo worship is a jolly good move for mankind, because Apollo is the god of healing and prophecy. Apollo is a very pretty, amazing, archetypal energy, if you want to call it, that the ancient world understood. And Apollo was always known as the great deity equivalent to the Druid male deity, Lu. So healing and prophecy go together. We'll talk about that a bit later. Now, another way we can tune into divine intelligence is through study. This is why I'm a scholar. Scholasticism in the medieval university system, the reason we have universities, there's actually only one reason we should be having them, is to tune into divine intelligence. When Abelard and these great scholars, Thomas Aquinas, Duns Scotus, the people that gave us our universities in the West, were teaching and researching, they were doing it as a thanksgiving to divine intelligence, right? They were reading their Bible, they were reading Aristotle, they were looking at the amazingness of the universe, and they were in love with it, and they wanted to understand it. So the pursuit of understanding is itself a form of worship, right? That's what true scholarship's about. And if you read any of these great thinkers of the past, even down to, that tradition has not completely gone. There are great philosophers have been in our university system ever since, and right down to people like Heidegger and, contemporary philosophers around, who are aware of the importance of the sacredness of study. True study is a sacred act, and that's why these universities always have little chapels, and prayer and study go together. And it's the same in the Jewish tradition. The rabbis in the synagogues, study and prayer go together. Same in the Islamic tradition. So this is not a confessional phenomenon. It's been discovered, let's say, by the greatest scholars of mankind, that to really sharpen your human intelligence, you then can plug into divine intelligence. And Socrates talked about this as well when he, and this is the next thing I want to move on to, which is that human intelligence can sometimes come unstuck if it loses relationship with moral intelligence. Okay? One of the things about divine intelligence that's been affirmed again and again and again by all the greatest thinkers of history is that it's morally good. God's nature is goodness. And this is just a linguistic reflection on the fact that the word God, which is an Anglo-Saxon word of origin, is related to the word good. They're completely etymologically connected. And they come from the same root as the word to gather or togetherness. Goodness is that which brings people together, and God is the energy or force behind goodness which enables gathering to take place. I love language, and as many philosophers have said, we have to attend to language. Jean Gebser, who wrote The Ever-Present Origin, a great contemporary 20th century philosopher, argued that we have to attend to language to find its hidden nuances. So if we look carefully at the word God, it gives up its secrets to us. Okay, so moral intelligence is part of this. We can't become just clever in an intellectual way, and this is one of the problems with our current education system, is it has encouraged this idea of ethical neutrality. The thing is to become cool, clever, savvy, and get on and make loads of money, irrespective of your ethics. This is a betrayal of the whole legacy of our Western and global education system. True intelligence is moral as well as intellectual, and an authentic school or an authentic university will be teaching ethical intelligence. So what do I mean by moral intelligence? Well, I mean peaceableness. Absolute bedrock for any higher learning is non-violence and peaceableness, on a personal nature. Yogis never took on a student unless they swore to non-violence. Buddhists, it's the basic thing, non-harm, ahimsa. Jains, likewise. You can't study with the Jain sage and be ranting and raving and violent. So that's why the planet, if we want to move to our next level of awareness as a planet, talking about planetary initiations, we have to calm down and become less violent as a planet. This is why Buddha talked about the Eightfold Path. That's all about morality. Non-stealing, non-lying, non-harming, non-violence and so on. We need to cultivate that if we're going to move up the scale of our understanding of divine intelligence. Truth-telling is very important. Aletheia in Greek, meaning the uncovering, the revealing. Truth is really what we're talking about here. Divine intelligence is the truth of ultimate reality, if you want. But we won't see it if we go around lying all the time. If our nature is premised on obfuscation and so on. And that includes our social systems. I've proposed in one of my books, 99 Ways to Save the Planet, a very simple rule that should be passed in Parliament, which is that any politician caught lying should immediately lose office. It should be an oath when you take a public office, very, very important role in a democracy, that you don't lie. Yeah? And if you're caught lying, you just are obliged to resign. I think that if that were brought in, if truth was made a fundamental, expectation of, and not just political leaders, but religious leaders, obviously, and bureaucrats and government officials and so on, gosh, you'd see a difference on this planet pretty rapidly. And then we might begin to advance up the level of moral intelligence, which in turn, it's like going up the mountain, like Moses did, and then God will come down and meet us too. We might then get divine intelligence saying, oh look, there's something going on planet Earth, I better show up again. We're like a naughty class that have been causing mayhem. And teacher's ready to come back, but he said only if we calm down and stop chucking the furniture about. So look, truthfulness. Also goodness is part of moral intelligence. And that, as I say, is like how we manifest God's nature is through goodness. It's the same word. Compassion is part of goodness. Compassion for other people. We've all got faults and blind spots, and we make mistakes like kids. The parent has to have absolute compassion. That is part of real love, if you And if we practice this, we're actually doing just what Aristotle said. Aristotle said all ethics is about cultivating the virtues. He talked about virtue ethics, which is now one of the great schools of philosophy in terms of ethics. I'm 100% behind that. In terms of, if we're going to get to divine intelligence, we have to practice virtue ethics. And that means we have to learn about them, study them, practice them. We have to adopt values in our life. But Aristotle wasn't a kind of absolute Puritan who abolished everything and whipped people if they, did something wrong. He was saying the virtue is the mean between the extremes. So there's the kind of Taliban types on the planet that their motivation is not wrong. They want to get everything back to kind of the right path, but they've gone so extreme that they end up doing the wrong path. Then there's the kind of total anti-theists who say, no, we just want to hang out and be utter hedonists and life is meaningless, there's no God. There's a mean between these extremes, which is self-discipline, self-regulation, and self-wisdom. That's the Socratic path. Know thyself, which then leads to the influx of higher intelligence. Socrates had a demon, that's a daimon, that's the kind of divine voice. Okay, so that's the job in a nutshell. Now, the next area of research that we're looking at here is well, that all sounds so simple. Why aren't we all doing it? What on earth's the problem? So we have to ask a very difficult question, which is, what is opposing this divine intelligence? Is there some force or element on the planet? Is there a counterforce? Like, can we talk about a diabolic intelligence? Is there something that is opposing divine intelligence? Well, I'm working on a book called On the Varieties of Ignorance, which is something very interesting. I don't think anybody's actually really studied the varieties of ignorance before. William James talked about On the Varieties of Religious Experience. I'm talking about On the Varieties of Ignorance. And because as a teacher and as a scholar and philosopher who loves educating, I've encountered all kinds of ignorance in my time. Human beings, especially younger ones, but not just younger ones, older ones too, have an enormous variety of forms of ignorant behaviour that they can manifest. And we're all doing that collectively like mad. So we have to study this. Now, whether by studying it, I think we might reach some conclusions as to the antidotes, what medicines needed. What are the varieties of ignorance? Well, this is just a report from the front line. One is fear. Fear always blocks people learning and blocks access, certainly to divine intelligence, even to human intelligence. If you're afraid of knowledge or afraid of something, then you get frozen, you get into paralysis. Another is ego, which is, oh, I already know that. You've all met people that whatever you tell them, they say, oh, I know that already. It's ego. And Christ said, you can't stick new wine into full bottles. He was always making up parables to describe that kind of student. I know everything, you can't tell me anything. Right, you can't stick the new wine in. Jealousy is another one. People become jealous about knowledge. I know this, I want what you know. Or, well, I'm not letting you have any of what I know. Ego and jealousy are closely connected. I'm jealous, you know so much, can I have some? Can I steal it off you? All those thoughts get in the way of accessing divine intelligence. Another is resentment. Why do you know that? Why do you do that? Just all kinds of resentment. They're unskillful reactions, and they're the opposite of generosity. Anger's another killer. Anger's another variety of ignorance. You can't learn anything if you're angry, because it blocks the mental processes. Violence is another variety of ignorance. If you're, I mean, it's a dreadful thing to have to say this, but there are teachers on the planet now being killed, targeted by religious fanatics in parts of the world. That poor Pakistani girl that was trying to study, she was shot by Taliban types for just wanting to study. That's violence, totally getting out of hand. Learning, study is a sacred thing and should be encouraged for kids and adults all over the planet, and violence should never be used. any kind of pain is normally a block to learning, and it's a form of ignorance. It's like, obviously if you're in pain, you're not going to focus on learning. So they've done experiments with teaching that they found that if you sit people in comfortable chairs, you give them nice background music, relaxed, they can learn a language in a couple of weeks. Whereas if you make them sit in really uncomfy chairs and learning is an uncomfortable experience, nobody learns. So I think learning should be realised to be the highest form of pleasure we humans are capable of. G. Moore, the great Cambridge philosopher, said the highest form of pleasure is intellectual pleasure. Aristotle said the same, even Epicurus. So why do we think school's so horrible that people don't want to go, or universities? Why is it all about pain and discomfort and effort rather than pleasure? Divine intelligence should be like the highest pleasure we humans are capable of. It's like a sort of intellectual orgasm. I mean, to use a tantric metaphor. That's the highest form of pleasure we can have as human beings. So pleasure should be part of learning, rather than pain. Pain is the problem. Hurt is a form of pain that we feel. I never had opportunities to study. I wasn't given a grant. I couldn't learn. My parents were ignorant. They used to beat me. All those hurts get in the way of us mastering learning. Lack of consciousness. And we've got a paper later on in this seminar about the nature of consciousness. That's a crucial thing. Lack of empathy. Narcissism. Lack of communication. Lies. Depression. Despair. All these psychological states of negativity mean that we can't learn. We can't access divine intelligence. The essence of them all, I think, could be summed up by negation, negativity. The saying of no. No, I won't learn. No, I don't want to know. Can we just pause there for a sec?
Okay.
Okay, so what else is opposing divine intelligence and the human ability to receive it? These are all a list I'm going through. I would say that indifference is another resistance to intelligence. People adopting a sort of apathy about issues, a feeling of powerlessness, that no point learning about the world, nothing they can do anyway. A kind of disempowerment is out there. Oh, it's all too complex, there's no point in me learning, I can't master it. A destructiveness then that arises because I can't learn something. Well, I'll destroy it. There's also like an oversensitivity, because an oversensitivity to one's own sufferings and a lack of sensitivity to other people's sufferings. That's a kind of narcissism in the psychological jargon. It's the intense awareness of what's going wrong in my life, not realising that, well, look, there are all those 6 billion other people out there, and it's a lot worse for a lot of them. So the antidote to all this is hopefully emerging. You could sum up by lack of compassion. Now, why isn't this quality taught? Why don't we? I mean, it is if you join spiritual or ethical teaching, go and meditate, but that fundamental lack of compassion is one of the big problems on the planet. Another problem is just time takes so long to evolve awareness. We humans have evolved over a very, very long time. So, why does it take so long? Obviously, poor education is a problem. Our schools don't really produce moral awareness, the importance of ethics, the importance of wisdom, the importance of divine intelligence in the way that we're talking about at this seminar is just totally off the agenda of a lot of the world's educational systems, which therefore it's a self-perpetuating problem on the planet. Rather, they're competitive and exam structured and so on, without realising that the real exams are interior. It's about our own judgment of our own moral and intellectual performance. We know what we're doing, There's also the problem of what St. Paul called wickedness in high places. You know, there are people that are corrupt, running our education systems, running our schools, running our religions. And why? You know, what is it that makes people corrupt and evil? There are people out on the streets all over the planet protesting. I mean, God forbid, even in Slovenia, a couple of days ago, there was a kind of demonstrations. Why is there wickedness in high places? St. Paul knew all about that. Read his writings. Another opposition that causes lack of intelligence to rise is simply propaganda. People don't know what to believe. There's also deliberate silencing of voices that speak truth on the planet. And of course, with propaganda, you never know who to believe. Some of the sources that we ought to be able to look to are actually partial. We're not getting the bigger picture. So that sometimes people think, well, true knowledge is impossible. This was David Hume's position, one of the wisest men in Britain at the time, very learned scholar. He came to the view that skepticism is the only possible response to the shortage of life. You can never live long enough to really know, to master knowledge. And he took the position that the Jains did, and to some extent Epicurus and Cicero and some other academics, Carneades, this idea of skepticism being the only wisdom in the end. And therefore skepticism to any kind of divine intelligence. Look, we can never know that, so it's not even worth looking at. That's very much in vogue, that concept. But I think it's a false move. What I'm trying to say here is it's self-defeating. The fact that knowledge is very hard to master doesn't mean we shouldn't try for it. The fact that it's impossible to be 100% good doesn't mean we shouldn't try to be. The other problem is overwhelmingness of information. There's just too much to master. How can we do it? The media is saturated with rival views. On every issue, there's a kind of conflict between this view and that view. Take the question of the censorship or not of the media itself, the Leveson inquiry. Should there be legislation? Shouldn't there be? You know, both sides have good arguments, and so who do we know who to trust? So the media always puts forward this rivalry of equally valid viewpoints, and that becomes a problem. It's what Kant called the antinomy of knowledge. It's inbuilt into knowledge that position A and its opposite position B are both equally valid, and the human mind is incapable of really knowing. So therefore, given the limitations of our knowledge, how can we possibly master divine intelligence, or even begin to receive any information? So these are all blockages which lead to intellectual paralysis, a lack of moral certainty. Take issues like gay marriage, you know, there are arguments on all sides, nobody knows what to believe. So we end up with a kind of moral paralysis and a lack of trust in knowledge itself. It's as if the human experiment, Homo sapiens, is kind of doesn't know where to go next. So what's my next topic I want to talk about now, and I'm going to move on to, is what's the antidote to all this? To answer the question, what is opposing divine intelligence on the planet, is the question of what I call diabolic intelligence. Is there some kind of, like the Zoroastrians say, or the Muslims or Christians, is there a kind of devil force behind the negative stuff? There's so much negative stuff going on that it's a valid question to ask. You know, the Zoroastrian mythology about Ahriman that opposes Ahura Mazda, which has influenced Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Obviously, it's a problem. If it's true that there's a kind of diabolic intelligence. I mean, the devil is very clever, by all accounts, Satan, but lacks moral intelligence. You know, there are Satanists on the planet that argue that whole story is wrong, and that Satan was a very light being that opposed the wickedness of a tyrannical god. There are different mythologies around this. Manichaeanism. Mani invented a whole story whereby the cosmic light and the cosmic dark have been in an eternal struggle for eons, and we humans are the battleground. This is why they sought to, in a sense, abandon the material world. The Manichaeans argued this material world is fallen to evil, and there's nothing we can do about it, right? It's already gone. All we can do is escape. This influenced the Cathars, who argued the same thing, that the whole material world has fallen under the devil. The only thing that we can do is escape with our spiritual bodies to some other realm, like a heaven world. To me, that seems to give too much power to the devil, with all due respect. I quite like the material world. Being a Tyrian, you know, I love the loch, the hills, the mountains, beauty, music. I don't agree that this is all given over to the devil. And but I do think that there's a conversation and there's research needed to be had here about the nature of diabolic intelligence. And of course there are people now with all their cosmological and UFO research who are saying, well, it's all because this part of the universe was colonized millions of years ago by nasty ETs, you know, and there's people discussing this. We can talk now rationally, if we're going to talk about divine intelligence, you know, are there diabolic intelligences in other parts of the cosmos or universe? There are people saying the planet's being taken over by robot beings, you know, etc., etc. Let's have this discussion and let's nail it. And if there are diabolic intelligences, let's get rid of them. Let's educate them. You know, if there are nasty ET types trying to take over this planet, well, time to get off the planet is what I'd say, and let humans get on with cultivating their divine intelligence, which is what is intended. Big topics, you know, what we're up against here, big topics. So what's the antidote to all of this then? I've listed some of the problems that are blocking divine intelligence progress on this planet. What's the antidote? Well, there isn't just one. There's got to be a variety. The question is, how do we elevate ourselves and make ourselves suitable receptacles for divine intelligence, right? For Arwen or for the Holy Spirit. One of the first strategies I would recommend is what religious thinkers talk about, repentance. You know, if you've been doing morally wrong acts and being really stupid, the first thing you've got to do is repentance, which is realizing what you've been doing and saying, okay, I'm not going to do it anymore. That leads to reconciliation. Another strategy is forgiveness. You know, if ignorance has been happening, then forgiveness can solve that often. Apologies are important. A crucial thing here is humility. You see, one of the things about diabolic intelligence is that it can be extremely arrogant. You know, the people that did the Holocaust against the Jews in Germany were very, very clever. It was a huge bit of social engineering. You know, everything had to be worked out. And yet the one thing they were lacking was humility and compassion. And it's the same with evil, is often very intelligent. But divine intelligence is intelligence plus ethics, plus goodness, plus morality. That's what I'm stressing here. And that's what humility is about. That's why Christ always stressed humility. You know, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God. That's the crucial point there. And for that you need surrender. This is where Sufism and the Islamic tradition, in a sense, reinforce that aspects of Christ's teaching. Christ was always going on about humility and surrender. People didn't take it seriously and ridiculously turned him into a god that you worship, which is the complete antithesis of what he would have wanted. So Muhammad came along and reminded people, no, this really is about surrender and humility to God, to divine intelligence. In Arabic it's called aql. Right? So surrender is the Sufi or Islamic path. And only that can bring true knowledge of God and divine intelligence into our lives. The other thing we have to do is service, the other strategy. Service of one another, service of good causes, service of charities, helping the unemployed, the poor, the sick, whatever, the disabled, you know, and teaching as a form of service. It's the one I've chosen. For that, to do service effectively, you also have to have discipline. You can't be a good fireman if you're lazy and don't get up when the alarm goes. You can't be a good doctor if, you know, you're too lazy to go and help the patient. So discipline is part of it. And discipline comes from the Latin word for learning and study. Discipleship simply means learning. Another antidote is study. Everything I'm saying here simply is the fruit of 30 years study into these topics. Everybody on this planet. I was sitting in the Vatican Library recently, amazing place. Thousands of people studying for many years. You know, the race here is between those people on this planet who are prepared to study and those people who aren't, and who trash and denigrate those people who do. You know, it's very quite simple, right? Another antidote is prayer. That's when you gather your energies into yourself. I think it's ridiculous now, where we've entered such a secularized world whereby town councils are no longer allowed to start their meetings with prayers to the divine, when nurses and doctors can no longer pray with patients, when prayer's gradually being abolished from our society. And yet it's been found scientifically that prayer helps the healing process. You know, they've done case studies after case study with groups of cancer patients who are dying, you know, who are prayed for, recover much better than those that don't. There is some kind of energy going on in prayer. Science needs to figure out what it is and, you know, endorse and support it. The University of Oxford, where I used to teach, was not built through science, it was built through prayer. and that's so important that we remember that. And the scientific study of prayer is really amazing, what's going on. One of my dear friends, Dom Sylvester Huedard, a monk at Prinash Abbey in Gloucestershire, was involved in an international study with prayer between Christians and Buddhists, and also looking at meditation practice, which is part of prayer. They're indistinguishable. You can't pray unless you can meditate. You can't meditate unless you can pray, as I see it. And they're part of the same phenomenology that needs studying, but also practicing. Daily prayer, daily meditation, everybody on the planet, I think, will solve the problems on this planet. Because that's when you allow divine intelligence into your being. This, in turn, we need to learn to focus the will, and this, in turn, improves memory. If ignorance is coming from lack of memory, then remembrance is improved. Compassion, therefore, is improved because the ego dissolves, and you realise you are bigger than just your ego, for God's sake. The ego is a temporary thing. Other strategies, I think beauty and the arts, and music and poetry and drama, all this stuff, comes from divine inspiration. The artists of the world are bringing the divine intelligence down to us. The true artists, the Dantes, the Shakespeares, the Beethovens. True science does the same. True science, the Einsteins, the Newtons, comes from wonderment, and brings magical possibilities. All the kind of gadgets and gizmos we all love came from true science. What's the next true science going to bring 100 years from now, 200 years? It won't bring anything unless we plug into divine intelligence through wonder. Another way of plugging into divine intelligence is through dreams, through synchronicities, through attending to the sacred in words, through studying language, appreciating language. So these are some of the antidotes, I would say. And I have, you know, these are things I've been thinking about. Love is really one way of describing, summing up the antidotes. So, where would that get us? If we can do these antidotes, if we can practice spreading the healing balm on the wounds of mankind, you know, the lack of knowledge, the lack of wisdom that's rampant in our world, all kinds of really interesting avenues of research open up. And we can, I think, begin to talk about enlightenment research. I was talking to Andrew Cohen recently, who's written studies of evolutionary enlightenment, and I agree with a lot of what he says. I was talking to him about the perspective of the periodic table of the world's religions and philosophical traditions, though, that the varieties of spiritual teaching on the planet, they need to be studied and appreciated, cared for. They're all precious. Take Syria, you know, here we have Alawis fighting Sunnis, Shias, there are Christians in there, you know. Rather than fighting each other, these Syrians should be appreciating each other. Each tradition is an amazing vintage. It's like having a cellar with incredible vintage wine. Alawism has been bubbling away for centuries, very profound esoteric teaching. Sunnism, very profound. Aisha, Muhammad, you know, going right back to the source. The same with Shiism, from a different route. What we need to cultivate is an intelligence broad enough, like Nagarjuna said, to see both sides of every issue. Rather than getting stuck in either or, it's either this or that, it's Alawi or Sunni. Rise to the enlightenment place that Nagarjuna talks about, and access the paradoxical simultaneity of how both are right from their own perspective. This is the kind of transpersonal position of transpersonal history, which is what I've argued in my doctoral thesis and in the periodic table of the world's religions. To get divine intelligence manifested on this planet, I think we have to rise to that what Hegel called the place of synthesis, where the rival elements of truth claims then are reconciled. Hegel, in his own logic, worked out the same concept. Ken Wilber's done the same with his concept of integral thought. So we need to get to a place on this planet of integral enlightenment, or you know, synthetic overview, or transpersonal wisdom, whereby we aren't in these conditions of rivalry and jealousy and resentment, but rather each nation, each culture, each language system, each religion appreciates and loves each other, because we've all, you know, come so far, we've all evolved so far. So that's really, and in terms of academic work, the final thing I want to say, the final antidote, is our academics could be doing a lot more, and instead of the dissipation and fragmentation of so much academic research that goes on, each little specialism working away, we need to build common languages between the disciplines and fragments of knowledge, between the branches of science, humanities, the arts, and theologies. And this is where philosophy comes in. This is where the Centre for the Study of Divine Intelligence comes in. You know, let's integrate the findings of all these different branches of academia and give them back into loving service of the divine intelligence, because that's why we've been doing this game for the last 2,500 years since Plato founded the Academy and Aristotle the Lyceum. That's why these universities exist, right? So let's let our universities again be halls of wonder and love of wisdom, which is what they're supposed to be, which is about integral knowledge, right? And then each discipline, each branch, the economists, the political theorists, the medical professionals, whatever, the lawyers and so on, each branch of knowledge then has to ask, well, how can it play its part in the advancement of mankind's ethical and metaphysical and social well-being? You know, that's what we're here for. Okay, so that's the sketching out of the antidote. Now, just finally to finish, conclusions. Well, I think this is good news. You know, I'm not doom and gloom. I'm going to say be of good cheer. You know, this work is important. It's gonna win. You know, we need every scholar on this planet, every educated, learning person, right from, you know, a kid in primary school up to, you know, postgraduates. Let's get on with this work. This is so important. But remember that we're doing it within that bigger picture context of service, of loving service to divine intelligence, beyond any religious labels. So many people now say they're spiritual, not religious. Great. You can actually be both. But, you know, we need to be meta-religious. Spirit infuses all our religions, yeah? And it's about an attitude of service and love. The question we're looking at today of divine intelligence is, I think, the fundamental question in life. It's a huge one, and that's what makes it exciting. So cultivate your own intelligence, the conclusion, I think, of my talk, and you will receive, let's call it, divine downloads. You know, divine intelligence then has got somewhere to go if you've poured out a bit of your own arrogance, right? That's the Jesus thing with the wine. And as you walk on the path, you will be joined by others. And then it becomes easier, collectively and individually. Okay, it's like if you know when you're doing Duke of Edinburgh Outward Bound type stuff, if you have to go and walk 40 miles across the moor, it's really tough if you're doing it alone. But if there's 20 of you doing it, it becomes easier. It's funny, it becomes a collective energy. So the more of us ask these fundamental big questions and practice the answers, the easier it will collectively become. And this is also true in nature and in science. Light, if you think about it, is a flooding together of electrons in unison and harmony. That's what makes electricity and light. You know, it's not one little electron going off and doing its own thing. It's a whole group flooding. And so divine intelligence is also part of that social solidarity of nature. And we see this in water, in the way atoms swirl, in air and gases and fire and so on. So the nature itself is divine intelligence at work. In earth, air, fire and water, as the Druids say, we see the divine at work. So divine intelligence is also coming together. It's a communing and a communion and a sharing. You know, because it's in all of us. That's the beauty of this story. So anyway, it's a symposium, which means literally coming together, drinking together. And so that's the point of today. And you know, to celebrate that energy.